Okay, I'm going to start letting people in now.
Over to you, Minister.
Great. Okay. Well, look, I'll get started just so we don't keep anyone longer than we have to. Real pleasure to join you this afternoon, and massive thanks to everyone who's tuning in, and of course to all of our panelists for joining us. Apologies we're not doing this in person, but we wanted to make sure that we could get this done prior to St. Patrick's Day and everything else happening. And obviously the new way in which we're engaging with each other via online can often be a really useful tool. So delighted to see everybody, albeit virtually. Obviously, we're here to discuss reforming our licensing laws. And I think many of you, if not all of you online, would agree that our laws governing the sale of alcohol are outdated, and that's probably an understatement, but they are in significant need of modernisation. And as Minister, I'm really pleased that I have an opportunity to bring about this reform, but also as someone who has worked in this sector for many, many years before taking up the current role that I'm in, working in my parents' local pub and restaurant, working in busy bars in town, late bars, nightclubs, not just in Ireland, but abroad as well. So I've seen it from every angle. I've seen the challenges that are there, and obviously how important it is for each and every one of us in the sector to be responsible in what we're doing as well. As part of this process of reform, we've undergone a couple of stages, and as everybody will know, this isn't the first time proposals like this have come before us. But I thought it was really important, following our public consultation, to engage with those in particular who know the industry best, who know the operating environment inside out, and also to focus on the impact that this sector has in terms of our communities and public health, and how we bring all of this together and how we can work together to reform our licensing laws. We're talking about this at a time where we are coming out of a pandemic, and I'm very aware that obviously COVID is very much still with us, but at the same time the masks are gone, clubs are open, you know, people are getting back into the office, and things are starting to get back to normal. At the same time, this is a sector that has been absolutely decimated in some areas. There are people who've had to close their business. There are others who have been struggling, and there are those who are just trying to get back on their feet. So while it's great to see that people are out and about, I'm very aware that there is a need to do what we can to support the hospitality industry. The need to reform the legislation in this area, I think, is particularly clear, some of which dates back to 1833, so very much in line with what I said at the outset, that these laws are outdated, and it's long been identified as needing overhaul. So consolidating and modernising our existing laws, that's really what we're talking about here, and our objective. Programme for Government, as well as my own justice plan for 2021 and now 22, which I only brought to government last week, commits to reviewing and modernising our alcohol licensing, but also the issue of outdated licensing laws is something that has come up and is very much part of the report of the Nighttime Economy Task Force, and was identified as a key challenge in making sure that we have a vibrant, a diverse, a sustainable nighttime economy in Ireland. My own department has been hugely involved in that work, but also there are many people on our panels, and those maybe who are tuning in as well, who have played a part in that particular task force that was chaired by my colleague Catherine Martin. The task force gave, I hope, stakeholders across the nighttime economy sector an opportunity to get involved in developing innovative approaches to try and achieving these goals, a diverse, sustainable and vibrant nighttime economy, particularly keeping in mind the fact that we've just come out of a pandemic and how much it has impacted on this sector in particular. Many of the actions in the report itself explore explore new and more suitable ways of operating in the nighttime economy, as well as looking at practical solutions to obstacles and challenges that are already there. And obviously this has been identified as quite a significant challenge. So from my point of view, I'm absolutely committed to enacting these licensing laws to try and reflect the changes of our society and the way we live our lives, the lifestyles of the 21st century. And I think a modern licensing system is a way in which we can do that. So last September, government agreed that we would bring forward heads of a general scheme of a bill to be prepared. And again, I want to stress that this work is a priority for me. What I plan to do with that piece of legislation is to repeal the outdated Licensing Acts of 1833 to 2018, the Registration of Clubs Acts, which is 1904 to 2008. I'll be replacing those with legislation updated, which will streamline provisions more suited to the type of modern society that we live in. It's also my intention to repeal the Dance Halls Act of 1933. So I sincerely hope that by repealing these and bringing forward a single piece of legislation, that we're going to bring an end to a reliance on some 100 different pieces of primary legislation and many secondary pieces of secondary instruments to try and navigate. So it's not straightforward, and just by even saying that there are 100 pieces of primary legislation and some secondary just gives you an example of what we're dealing with here. Overall, the proposed sale of alcohol bill is going to reform and consolidate alcohol licensing laws into a single act, as I've just said. This will make it more accessible. This is going to make it more user-friendly for those who need to access licenses, for the trade, for courts, for Gardaí, and for the general public as well. And I'm happy to say that the work on that particular bill is at an advanced stage, but we're here today because I suppose I wanted us to air out maybe some of the final pieces and the policy decisions that need to be taken in a number of areas. I mentioned at the outset, this is not just obviously about restructuring and streamlining processes. We need to make sure that we have a particular focus and that the interests of public health, of consumers, of communities must be central to any reforms that take place. Any changes in alcohol licensing laws will of course need to be balanced with the need for regulation in the public interest. In particular, public health and public order must be prioritised, and I think we'd all agree with that. We have to be very mindful of the fact that there are very clear linkages to harm with alcohol consumption, and that's why we all want to make sure that what we do protects people, as well as obviously gives everybody an opportunity to go out and to enjoy themselves, to make a livelihood, and obviously to contribute to the cultural offerings, not just for people who live in Ireland, but who travel and visit as well. Obviously, this is a reform on which there are many views across society, and there's a lot of people have different views on this. That's why we're here today. So I'm very much here to listen. And for those maybe who thought I might be giving some bit of a direction in terms of some of the final policy pieces, I really wanted to just hear these. I suppose I wanted to hear from those involved across the different areas that I've mentioned, a follow on from the over 5,000 submissions that we received through the public engagement, and following on from this, I'll then be making, I suppose, clearer statements in terms of where we're going in some of those policy areas, and we'll be doing that when we publish the general scheme of the bill, which I hope to happen in Q2 of this year, so coming from spring into the summer. So I just want to thank all of you for being here today. I'm delighted that we could bring all of you together and that we have people joining in. As Neil has said, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, but just again to reassure you of my commitment. The timeframe we've set is the end of the year to enact this law. It's very ambitious. I know that, but at the same time, this has been discussed, talked about, reviewed, debated for many, many, many years. And I really think it's time that we enacted legislation that modernises our alcohol licensing laws, but that ensures that this is a sector and a part of our economy that can not just sustain itself over the next few years, but that can flourish and grow and can continue to develop. So I'll hand you back over to Neil. Again, thanks to everyone for joining us today, and I look forward to engaging with everybody here as we progress this piece of legislation. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Minister, and good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to this session. My name is Neil Ward. I'm an official here in the Department of Justice, and I get the privilege of moderating the discussion here this afternoon on the issue of reforming our alcohol licensing laws. Just to get us started, a brief run through, I suppose, of what's going to happen over the next 80 minutes or so. Firstly, I just want to introduce our panel of speakers and quickly run through some house rules before we get started. And then I'll hand you over to each of the panel in turn, who make a few introductory remarks for about 5 minutes each. And then we'll start putting some of the questions that we've already received, and indeed those that we received throughout the event, to the panel. I suppose in her opening remarks, Minister McEntee obviously spoke about how important it is that our licensing laws reflect modern society in all its diversity. And I think we all start from a platform of agreeing that there's a need for reform of the current legislation. And this, we hope, will give us an opportunity to hear the diversity of viewpoints that exist in relation to these matters. As the Minister said, we had over 5,000 responses to the public consultation on this, which is one of the biggest responses we've received to any public consultation exercise arranged by this department, which I think shows the level of public as well as stakeholder interest in the matter. I'm very glad that we've a significant audience. I can see both on Zoom and on YouTube, which includes stakeholders from across the sector, but also members of the public and indeed members of the Oireachtas. So thank you to all who've taken the time to come and join us here today. I suppose to move on to introducing our speakers, we have 6 speakers today, so we've an impressive panel of people. First of all, Pádraig Cribben is Chief Executive of the VFI, the Vintners Federation of Ireland, which is, of course, the national trade organisation representing pubs around Ireland outside the Greater Dublin area. Una McKinney is Head of Communications and Advocacy with Alcohol Action Ireland, who are working to reduce the level of alcohol harm and to improve public health, safety and well-being. We have Amory Farrelly, who's the CEO of Fingal County Council and also representing the CCMA, and was a member of the government's Nighttime Economy Task Force. Donal O'Keefe is CEO of the LVA, the Licensed Vintners Association, which of course is the trade and representative body for Dublin publicans, with about 600 members. Francis Ruan is former director of the ESRI and now chair of the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council, reporting to the Taoiseach government on key competitiveness issues facing the Irish economy. And finally, we have DJ and activist Sunil Sharp from Give Us the Night, who was also a member of the government's Nighttime Economy Task Force. I've said this to the panel, but just to explain to the audience, I'm going to call on each of the speakers individually to speak for up to 5 minutes. To give us some introductory remarks. I have warned them that I'll try and keep them to those 5 minutes. So hopefully that'll work. And then after each panelist has made their introductory remarks, we'll move on to the Q&A segment. As I say, we received quite a number of questions in from stakeholders in particular in advance. We definitely, with a panel of 6, we won't have time to get everyone's views on all of those, but I'll try to work to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to contribute to the debate. So I think that's enough from me. Without further ado, I might turn to Sunil Sharp of Give Us the Night, maybe for the first introductory comments, please.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Minister, and everyone from the department for hosting us here today. I mean, there's a lot to get through here in 5 minutes, so I'll just try to power through it. It's been a long road for our campaign, which has been in operation since 2004. Although it's taken many years to get to this point, it's been a learning experience that we're thankful of, particularly in recent years as change has started to develop. It's worth reflecting that out of all sectors of nightlife, late night was the worst affected by licensing amendments in 2008, despite accounting for a tiny fraction of overall alcohol sales in the country, a fraction that is even smaller in 2022. It was the only sector that openly protested the changes at the time, changes that we've had to deal with for over 13 years now as our industry gradually disappeared. The industry was already in trouble in 2008. Since then, we've lost approximately 75% of nightclubs. Go back further to the turn of the millennium, and we have lost 84% of our then total of nightclubs. There's been increased public discourse around issues like diversity and inclusivity, but it's clear that the nighttime industry and nightlife at large has big improvements to make to offer the variety of cultural spaces and events that we could have at night, which current laws and regulations do not facilitate. Firstly, we need to look at the cost of opening and running venues. So besides high insurance costs, rent, commercial rates, rising energy costs, equipment rental, talent costs, wages, and other ongoing overheads, attempting to run a venue is not an easy thing to do. So-called special exemption orders, the late licenses that permit later opening at the time, that permit later opening to the time of traditional pubs need to go entirely. The word special, which refers to a special event, is at odds with how a permanent nighttime venue operates. There's nothing special about opening until 2:30 a.m., which is the earliest closing time for nighttime venues in Europe. And we hope that these charges will now be a thing of the past. This is also a clear example of where nightclubs have been forced into the pub licensing system because no appropriate or dedicated license exists. We need a standalone license priced at a nominal fee that can be used for entertainment and dance venues such as nightclubs to operate later into the night on a par with the closing times of our European counterparts. Just like a theatre license or restaurant license, we feel that this license should clearly match the business side of a music venue and not be subject to the extinguishment process for new operators. Again, I'll make reference to venues like nightclubs being forced into this aspect of the pub licensing system that is a huge barrier to entry, a sentiment that has been expressed to us a lot, particularly from younger business people. We need a theatre licence subject to a yearly approval in court rather than through revenue to be put back into use for late night without the requirements of late licence costs. The department should also consider the use of easier to obtain licences for one-off events and for other cultural buildings and art spaces where performances take place. What Ireland is in great shortage of are venue spaces and must make more use of existing spaces that can be used for events. While we advocate for a healthier nighttime economy that can be profitable for all license holders, we need to stress that nightlife is about people and communities and the culture of the night. We want a nightlife for everyone, for all communities and ages, for those who drink alcohol, for those who don't drink alcohol. Nightlife has to be allowed to grow organically without unnecessary obstacles in its way. If things change, as we hope they will, we see this as being a cultural renaissance in the making for Ireland that will help to keep talent in the country, build communities, offer greater career opportunities, and make Ireland one of the best countries of its size for nightlife in the world. Lastly, our campaign, this movement, the energy and the desire that led to this review finally happening, it came directly from the dance floor. We want to dance and have places to dance and just hope that people can stop stepping on their toes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sunil, and thanks for coming in under 5 minutes, which is
I was racing there, yeah, sorry.
I'm going to call on Ewan McKinney next from Alcohol Action Ireland, please. Ewan.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Minister and Department, for the opportunity to contribute to this process today. Alcohol Action Ireland support a reform and a modernisation of the alcohol licensing process, which is largely archaic and as such is frequently exploited by commercial opportunism. Over the years, while modified social norms have influenced a change in some alcohol behaviours, the principal concerns of alcohol contributing to significant crime, public disorder and safety remain central to the public rationale for adequate controls on the sale of alcohol. Today, with a much deeper understanding of the risk to human health from alcohol use and the knowledge that alcohol is responsible for the deaths of 4 people in Ireland every day, reducing alcohol use to at least a low-risk engagement has become an imperative of public health policy. In our view, a public health approach can only inform a reform of alcohol licensing laws if equal purpose is given to the objectives of public health alcohol policy. This would enable the input of expert knowledge and insight from local stakeholders such as the HSE, the Gardaí and community groups to inform the assessment of an application and expand on an approach partially recognised in commencing Section 4 of the Public Health Alcohol Act. In this context, while alcohol licensing has a public order policy fit within the Department of Justice, in our view, the significance of public health considerations suggests that this role should be no longer exclusively within its remit, and that a more holistic approach, such as within an independent authority that embraces all of these concerns, may be best placed to advance the reforms required. In this respect, we recognise the cohesion the Road Safety Authority has brought to licensing criteria and safety on our roads. Turning to the question of how alcohol licensing will improve cultural offering, in our view, greater alcohol availability has little to offer the improvement of cultural offerings and perpetuates the stereotype that offering our rich and diverse cultural expression is somehow reliant on a relationship with alcohol is deeply flawed. Recognizing the omnipresence of alcohol in cultural experiences undermines the shaping of a new environment that's been informed by a public health alcohol policy that seeks to ensure that a new generation of young people can go about their lives without having to navigate a tsunami of alcohol promotion and use. We urge the task force to challenge this harmful perception and to reimagine the integrity of cultural expression beyond a commercial caricature, which sadly that opportunity was missed. In our view, it should be possible, either by license or supported by local planning conditions, that cultural venues are allowed to operate, if they wish, early into the morning, but without the availability of alcohol. This would facilitate the operation of a variety of cultural experiences, including dance, but without the presence of psychoactive substance that so often disrupts such intimate experiences. Reforming alcohol licensing laws has consequences. And since the 1980s, a review and a series of interventions of alcohol controls has seen our society become awash with drink, with alcohol use doubling over the following 3 decades. And while economic opportunities expanded, so too did the societal burden of alcohol-related harm, which today costs our economy 3.6 billion and hinders our GDP growth, as outlined by the OECD recently. The specification of where alcohol is sold is a specific and critical aspect of alcohol control, and the density of venues and outlets in which alcohol is available impacts on the alcohol-related harm. In our view, and drawing from the evidence from other jurisdictions, further changes now will undoubtedly prove problematic. In the UK, the 2003 Licensing Act, which some of you will be familiar with, embraced similar nighttime economy rationale and aspirations, relaxing licensing laws, amending trading hours, and allowed for a 24-hour sale of alcohol. The measure, which was hoped to result in staggered closing times, was presented as a means of reducing violence and disorder at fixed peak closing times. However, to date, there is no compelling evidence to suggest that the alcohol-related crime has reduced or changed as a result of these measures. Changes observed include the shift of crime and disorder further into the early hours and subsequent strain placed on policing and emergency services. International reviews find that extensions in late night opening of alcohol premises are linked to increased intoxication, assaults, injuries, or demand for emergency services. So for instance, in Amsterdam, a 1-hour extension on closing times, which was introduced in 2009, saw an associated 34% increase in alcohol-related injuries. And a study in 18 Norwegian cities found that an additional 1-hour extension to opening times associated with a 16% increase in recorded assaults.
And
so to summarize, nearly there, we support the reform of the modernization of the process, but reframing it within the new authority that embraces an imperative of public health. We challenge the view of alcohol licensing, and we ask for consideration of the public health considerations that follows liberal reform of alcohol controls. Thank you.
A little over, but not too bad. I'm going to turn to Porrick Cribben next, please, from the Vintners Federation of Ireland. Porrick.
Good afternoon, Neil, and good afternoon, Minister, and thank you for the opportunity to address the webinar this afternoon. Current licensing law is complex and often not fully understood by the stakeholders. There are a number of different licenses issued by different authorities and with different costs. The application procedure needs to be streamlined, brought online, made efficient for the applicant, the court services, the Gardaí and other stakeholders. Having said that, the laws have by and large served us well over the years, and we need to be careful not to cast the baby out with bathwater. The consultation process initiated by the Minister raised certain questions, and I will address some of them here. First of all, the licensing application system. We believe all licenses should be processed through the court system, and by that we mean all. Currently, some licenses are through revenue or at the discretion of certain ministers. Given the accepted wisdom that the sale of alcohol is only permitted under license, it makes sense for the courts to be the final arbiter of who is awarded a license. There are a couple of important points that follow on from that assumption. The main one being that there needs to be a level playing pitch for all license holders. Therefore, any business or entity seeking a license must meet all the planning regulations and other regulatory requirements for similar venues. Very importantly, it would be extremely unfair if a cultural venue in receipt of state funding could compete for business with outlets with no state funding. We have already seen this, and we continue to see it on a daily basis happening with registered clubs. There is no valid reason why license should not be processed at district court level, except for appeals from that court and in the case of renewing lapsed licenses. The process for renewing licenses should be online with timely notification to the relevant authorities like Gardaí and fire authorities. Categories of license. You might ask, why should we license at all? Alcohol is a mood-changing product and needs to be sold in a controlled, responsible environment where there are implications and significant implications for those who transgress in either the sale or supply. Currently, there are on and off licenses, manufacturing and wholesale licenses. This system is fine, except there should only be one restaurant type license issued by the courts and understood by all. A condition of a wholesale license should be that they can only sell to outlets with a retail license, and this would significantly decrease the number of illegal outlets operating in the country. The extinguishment requirement. Currently, there's a requirement to extinguish a 7-day publican's license before a new pub license or spirit retailer's off license can be issued. The past 20 years has seen an explosion in the number of premises selling alcohol. Today, alcohol is sold in almost every corner shop, forecourt and cafe, along with the traditional outlets. Revenue figures show the following license numbers in September 2021. 6,788 7-day publican's license, 2,250 wine on license, 514 special restaurant licenses, and 1,045 hotel and other licenses. That's a total of 10,597 on-trade licenses, or a license for every 369 adults, as in over 15 in the country, one for every 369. And in addition to that, there are 3,500 off licenses. As a country, we are not lacking opportunities to buy and consume alcohol. There is neither a need or a rationale to increase the number of licenses, and the extinguishment requirement is the only effective control measure and must be retained. Nightclubs, late bars and SEOs. The VFI has no objection to the concept of nightclub and limited nightclub permits as outlined in the 2005 General Scheme. Head 63 of that General Scheme outlines that an applicant for a nightclub must have a 7-day publican's house license. This is vital and must be included in any revised legislation. Any definition of a nightclub should be clear as to the specific requirements around planning, type of venue, regulations, etc. The current system of applying for SEOs for late bars is outdated, costly, and lacks efficiency for both the applicant and the court service. It's easy to simplify. Any outlet wishing to trade as a late bar should get an annual certification to do so. Thereafter, applications for individual occasions should be online with an appropriate notification to the Gardaí. On this basis, the court service costs for individual date applications should disappear, as there would be no court involvement unless there was Garda objection. A facility needs to be introduced for smaller outlets to have a limited number of late nights per annum to facilitate local events. These occasions should not be subject to the requirement for a dance license.
Ulrich, if you don't mind, I'll hold you there if that's all right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to turn next to Frances Rand, the chair of the National Competitiveness and Productivity Council. Frances.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join the panel this afternoon and to provide an economics and competitiveness perspective on the issue, particularly on the extinguishment matter, which has just been discussed. It seems to me that since I turned the age of 18 and first became aware of pubs, the issue of pub licenses has come onto the national policy agenda on many occasions, associated with Department of Justice licensing documents and relevant economic and competition reports from bodies such as the Competition Authority and the OECD. And of course, when I was 18, the population of the country was under 3 million, and it's now around 5 million. So it's not surprising on population grounds alone that there's a need for reform and a process for creating additional licenses to serve the much larger and differently distributed population. So economic theory sorry, I'm operating out of a hotel in London, so I don't have my usual system. So forgive me if I lose track a couple of times. The economic theory and competition policy tells us that consumer welfare is greater when market supply responds to changes in consumer demand, in this case to a growing and wealthier population. Furthermore, artificial barriers to entry restrict competition in a market, protect incumbent firms by giving them local market power, thereby distorting potentially prices which impact on consumers. The licensing system now in place, and it's been discussed by the Minister as being in much in need of reform, creates a distortion where liquor licenses can be bought and sold as commodities, which was never their original purpose. It interferes with market responses to demand and can lead to speculative behaviour which further distorts the market. One unintended consequence of the Intoxicating Liquor Act of 2000, which led to the licenses being purchased anywhere in the country for extinguishment in order to obtain a new licence, was that the value of country licences increased greatly as their being extinguished was required for obtaining a licence in more densely populated urban areas. In effect, the Act created an economic rent for those holding existing licences and created the cost of entry for others. In some instances, this also led to these licences becoming prohibitively expensive to obtain for small-scale operations in a rural setting, as the licences were effectively transferred to larger pubs and off-licences in urban areas. This raises the possibility of reduced services and choice for those living in rural areas. The deregulation of the taxi licenses in the early 2000s led to many new entrants and increased the supply of taxis for consumers in urban areas. Speaking as a woman living in Dublin at the time, this represented a significant benefit to safer travel at night time. One lesson of note from the experience of removing the cap on taxi licenses is the issue of quality. With many new entrants joining the market, the regulatory system did not set it up well to actually monitor the quality of the vehicles. And a visit to any EU country such as Germany or Spain points to a higher quality of vehicles and a more professional branding of the taxi service. The arrival of the smartphone has obviously helped driver entry in that particular sector, as does the knowledge of the city is not a barrier as it was before. While there are, of course, public health social concerns associated with alcohol consumption, as already noted, policymakers should be guided by the principle of proportionality. In other words, if you're looking for instruments to achieve the objective, you should be looking for instruments that are most efficient and non-distortionary to implement those changes. So where more effective and less distortionary alternatives are available, these should be implemented. I'm not aware of any evidence which points to the beneficial role that the current system has as an effective policy to curtail the alcohol problems in this country. And in the context where drinking and driving is an issue, it does not seem to make sense to create incentives to reduce the number of pubs in areas of lower population density. Since pubs need to be licensed, it makes sense to have a licensing system that ensures quality, and this should be a key priority in joining up the activities of all departments and agencies involved in the regulation of this sector. This, I think, should be key to the reforms being considered. Any strategic view of Ireland's alcohol challenges would see the licensing system as complementing the appropriate tools to address the health and social issues we face, such as underage drinking, alcohol addiction, binge drinking, etc. Indeed, competition which makes it easier to enter may result in smaller pubs, and they are arguably of better scale to help address the social challenges that we have with alcohol. Targeted education programs, changing cultural attitudes to problem drinking, and other demand-side interventions that tackle the source of the problem directly are likely to be more effective. The government has already public health tools at its disposal in this area. There is much to be learned from taking a more systemic and holistic approach to granting pub licenses, and I very much liked the Minister's introductory comments in that regard. Lessons can be learned of experience to date with minimal distancing rules between schools and fast food outlets, and how this type of approach could be considered for the location of licensed premises. And ongoing training will also be important for both owners and servers in aspects of responsible alcohol retail as a means of limiting social ills arising from the excessive consumption of alcohol or underage drinking. Furthermore, it will be timely to look at the positive gains from the COVID period, with greater outdoor seating and pubs providing further competition for good coffee and food in earlier times of the day. In conclusion, I see no reason on economic or social grounds why the move to remove the extinguishing route should not take place in the granting of pub licenses, while noting that it would reduce the unintended benefits to some existing licence holders who would want to cash in on the economic rents generated by the current system. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frances. And I want to turn to Donal O'Keefe from the Licensed Vintners Association. Donal?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Minister, and thanks to the officials in the Department of Justice for facilitating today's session. We fully support the government's stated objective of streamlining and modernising licence law and to make it fit for 21st century business, consumer and regulatory purposes. In simple terms, we believe all licensing matters should be dealt with by the District Court, and we've set out a lot of detail around why we believe that in our submission. We think there is a strong case for a review and an equalization of license renewal fees and licensing costs across all and on off-trade sectors. And we believe this is an important point requiring a new licensing display system to display to the regulators and to the public the nature of the license and the associated trading hours with that business. In terms of categories of license, in simple terms, we believe there's an overwhelming case for 3 on-trade licenses only. A full 7-day publican's license for all alcohol-led businesses that would be the base license for a late bar license and also the base license for a nightclub license. There should be a hotel license for all accommodation providers for their residents. And there should be a restaurant license, a single restaurant license for food-led businesses. There needs to be clear delineations between those licenses and in particular between pubs and restaurants. So to our mind, restaurant licenses should oblige a restaurateur to not have a bar or bar counter, that alcohol can only be sold with food, table service only, all customers off the premises by 12 midnight, no special exemption orders, no dancing, and no off sales to separate from pub licenses. We do not believe there's a case for an additional new cultural license or theatre license, that any business involved in the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises should be obliged to get a publican's license. Level playing field, same terms and conditions, same public safety, public order, insurance, liability and security requirements. Level playing field for all, being a critical determinant of how the review of licensing should progress. In terms of late bars, nightclubs and special exemption orders, we're calling for the entire abolishment of the SEO system. We're not aware of any other license in the country or in Europe where you're obliged to apply daily for a daily 2-hour window at an exorbitant cost of €410 per night plus legal fees. We believe it should be replaced by a single annual late bar license, which would allow the late bars to trade to 2:30 a.m. 7 nights a week, and then an additional separate annual nightclub license allowing nightclubs to trade to 5 a.m. 7 nights a week. In terms of the hours that they would apply, we think traditional pub hours for Monday to Thursday are fine. Sunday should be the same as a Monday. In other words, open 10:30 a.m., close 11:30 p.m. and the late bar nightclubs to 2:30 a.m. and 5 a.m. respectively on Sunday nights. And that covers our positions and trading hours. And I'd like to devote a little bit of time regarding the extinguishing requirement in response to some of the comments that Francis made regarding the extinguishing requirement. Firstly, we note that there are 6,800 pubs in the country, but that number of pubs has declined by 21% since 2005. And, you know, in the 70s, there was 10,000 licenses in the country. The country is completely overpubbed. It's twice the license density on a per capita basis compared to the UK, which is liberalised. And the long-term trend in pub numbers in Ireland is unfortunately downwards, reflecting changing licenses and reflecting the huge number of pubs that are in the country already. In addition to the 6,800 pub licenses, there's 2,250 wine-on licenses, which are essentially in restaurant businesses, 500 SRLs, and a huge amount of off licenses. In total, there's 14,600 alcohol-related businesses in the country. We are not aware of any consumer demand for more licenses, and indeed, in our experience, the first people to object to licenses to any new pub license are local consumers and local residents. The big barrier to entry to the pub trade is planning permission. It is extremely difficult to get planning permission for new pubs. And indeed, under the Dublin City Development Plan, there's whole areas, Temple Bar, much of Dublin 2, where new planning permissions for pubs simply will not be considered. So the planning is a barrier to entry. In terms of licensing costs, absolutely there is a value to license, but the value to licenses has fallen from 250,000 in the late 90s to 40,000 today. There's a huge availability of license for sale, and that value will likely fall over the medium term. We agree that the UK experience with liberalisation has been wholly negative. It's led to a concentration of licenses in city centre and associated public order issues. We believe that the country's drinking culture and cultural norms should set the licensing regime, not the other way around. For generations, Ireland has adopted a restrictive regime, a controlled regime, a demanding licensing regime around alcohol for on-premise consumption, and we think that should continue. We note that the government's alcohol policy more broadly is around restrictions and controls. If we look at 2018, the act that was brought in, it was to put further restrictions on marketing, to put minimum prices in place, and to ensure that the industry is more responsible with its activities. Deregulation does not fit with that.
So I'm going
Finally, we think
we might pick up on some more of those points when we get into the Q&A, if that's okay. I want to turn lastly to Anne-Marie Farrelly from Fingal County Council. Anne-Marie.
Good afternoon, Neil, and thank you, Minister, for giving us the opportunity to present to everybody today. I'm Anne-Marie Farrelly. I'm Chief Executive of Fingal County Council in North Dublin. I'm also representing the Business and Enterprise Committee of the CCMA today. I've been participating in the Nighttime Economy Task Force in recent months and leading to the Nighttime Economy Strategy. In relation to, I suppose, local authorities and their function in any review of the licensing laws, our principal objective is to balance the needs of communities with the needs of business and the hospitality sector. We have gotten a closer connection with the hospitality sector throughout COVID, both in terms of administrating the government grants, the restart grants, the rates waiver scheme, but also in terms of assisting the reopening, and particularly the reopening with outdoor facilities where we tried to move heaven and earth, to be honest, in order to make the public realm available to businesses and so that it could be used by the licensing trade. And also we had some influence in terms of ensuring that the licensing laws allowed the serving of alcohol on those outdoor spaces. I think that worked quite well, and I would say on behalf of the sector that it was noticeably a different scenario when the licensing trade reopened, and it removed some of the public order issues that were arising in some of our town centres and in the city centre, etc. That said, any change into the licensing law should bear in mind public health, public order, public safety, and the needs of the communities that live adjacent or close to the licensing premises. We represent our communities. We also deal closely with the Gardaí through our joint policing committees. And I suppose we are aware when issues arise, and they can cause significant difficulties when there's problems associated with the licensing laws. But we find that when we deal closely with those that are taking responsibility for what happens in their premises, that we can work well and make sure that all issues are addressed with quickly. In relation to the nighttime economy, the commitment of the sector relates to developing quite quickly some 6 pilot projects. 2 of those will be located in Cork City and Dublin City, with the other 4 yet to be selected throughout the country. What we're looking to do is to broaden the nighttime economy offer, so to move beyond alcohol-based activities and make sure that the likes of cultural and art venues and retail, for example, are opening later and broadening the offer to families and to young people and people who aren't necessarily interested in the licensing offer. That said, I think that'll be to the benefit of all, and we are interested in the economies of our town centres, in the economies of all of our areas. So we want to do what we can to support all businesses, including the hospitality sector. Public safety is a key thing, and we're fully aware of our obligations in relation to the safety of public realm as people leave venues late into the night or any time. So there'll be a lot of work from local authorities through the Town Centre First initiative, where we'll be reviewing all of our areas in terms of the public realm, its suitability for the nighttime economy, but also the suitability for business and how they might use it better, and also whether it's safe and making it more safe from our perspective. The joint policing committees that I mentioned earlier do contain representatives of local authorities, obviously of the Gardaí, but more importantly of elected members who are very anxious to ensure that our towns and villages are safe places. The relationship then to the licensing laws, obviously relates to what happens and when. Where do crowds gather? How do they disperse easily? Is there public transport available for them? And all of those stakeholders were represented on the Nighttime Economy Task Force. So it is really a matter of us all working together to make sure that whatever change is introduced, that it balances the needs of everybody, that it isn't only an economic decision, but it's also in the interest of the people who live and work in our areas. I think that can be achieved through the likes of this forum. So I'm really pleased to meet all of the participants today. And I think this communication needs to be open. I do think there's an opportunity to review the licensing change relating to the serving of alcohol on the licensed public realm. Those licenses are through the planning system. And I think the success and otherwise of those licenses, that licensing change should form part of the consideration. And certainly speaking on behalf of North Dublin, I think it did make a significant change that the responsibility did rest with the licence holder. And I think they took that responsibility well and implemented and managed those areas accordingly. And certainly where it didn't happen, there was joint cooperation between ourselves and the Gardaí to make sure any improvements that were needed happened.
Marie, I'm going to hold you there if you don't mind.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for your initial contributions, and my apologies to those that I had to cut a little short. I think people will have got from that already a sense of the breadth of issues that need to be explored here. I thought we might begin maybe by just drilling into the trading hours piece a little bit. As part of our public consultation around this, we posed some questions about changing existing trading hours. And some of the responses we got back indicated there should be no restrictions whatsoever on trading hours. I wonder, Donald, do you want to give us an industry perspective on that sort of a proposal?
We're not interested in 24-hour trading, and we're not calling for that. I mean, the way we would see this, if our view came to pass, the vast majority of pubs in Dublin would trade the traditional pub hours. So to 12, and if we speak about the weekend as being the core of our trading experience, that would be 12:30 a.m. on a Friday and Saturday night for all pubs. We then see a cohort of pubs, probably of the order of 15 to 17 or 18% of the total pub population in Dublin, trading to 2:30 a.m., principally in the city centre. And then we see a very small number of businesses, 20 to 25 maybe in Dublin entirely, interested in a nightclub permit that would allow them to go to 5 a.m. So these will tend to be city centre focused, large venues who will develop a reputation and expertise around that style of business. Dublin, as the capital city with 1.1 million, can support a small number of those businesses. And hopefully as tourism recovers and weekend breaks and sporting matches recover to Dublin, there is a visitor to Dublin population that want late socialising. Certainly pre-COVID in 2019, our last full year of operation, we were aware of very significant consumer demand, both from domestic consumers and from tourists, for later socializing. And finally, could I say, one of the lifestyle trends we observed is people are going out less often. They are concentrating more of their socializing in the weekends. And when they're out on weekend nights, they want to go out for a long night, a big night, a late night. And certainly from a business perspective, we want to respond to that.
I might pull in Ewan then, if we talk about additional trading hours. Do you want to speak to any concerns there might be around the harms that could be associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I can recite obviously there's significant level of research, and I don't want to rain on people's parade, but the essence of the research is that where hours are extended, especially in cities, there is an impact in relation to public order. And, that has been, as I say, validated by a lot of research that would have taken place, not just in the two that I outlined, which is in Amsterdam and in the Norwegian cities. There's also significant case studies in Perth, in Sydney, in two places in Australia, New Zealand, and other venues where an extension of opening hours has been extended earlier into the morning. It does lead to increase in results, and it does lead to increase in public order. Now, the obvious impact of that is that it will feed into the emergency services, and these are alcohol-related harms. Some of these some of these harms are fairly innocuous, you might say, but sadly, in many instances, they're not. They're life-changing, and in some instances, they're even worse. They're fatal. So what we've outlined is that, yes, there is obviously an economic move, and as the Minister outlined and the Department's outlined on the thing, there is probably a view to extend the ousting hours, but there are consequences, and those consequences should be recognised and absolutely addressed if there's going to be an additional hour and opening in relation to the timing of public houses and licensed premises.
Thanks very much. You mentioned the economic aspect of it. Francis, do you want to jump in on whether there's any appeal to removing restrictions around trading hours and allowing the market to determine?
Yeah, I mean, go back to the point that Donald Boy touched on. You know, when licenses, trade and licenses at zero value, then we'll know there's no barrier to entry in the present system. And licenses should be on the basis of policy and planning and not on an extinguishment process. So while the cost of the license has gone down to 40k, that in my view is not close to zero. So of course they need to represent the case for their members, and that's what industry representatives should do. But the reform of the system, I think, needs to take account of the whole plethora of issues, including what we've just discussed, and not just those currently relating to licenses and the consumers of those services. So I do think, and I have lived in different countries at different stages, and seeing late alcohol hours open without the alcohol consumption problems that we have here, I think there's a lot to be done on the education and the health side, and on the way in which those running premises actually operate them safely. I think that's a really, really important part of it. And I think this holistic approach with the health, the society, the community, all of these pieces taken together, as Anne-Marie has touched on, I think that's absolutely vital. And that's what's been missing. We've done this in kind of piecemeal, bitty ways, trying to fix one bit without looking at the consequence of the other. I think the totality has to be taken together. And I think perfection is the enemy of the good. I think we might be ready to go back and revisit, but let's be clear on what we're trying to achieve. We set out to achieve it with the reforms, and then we go back and review, is it delivering what we wanted to deliver? Thank you.
Thanks. I want to stick with that extinguishment issue for a moment, if people don't mind. And for anyone watching who may not be aware, there's a requirement that an existing license for a pub or off license must be extinguished before a new license can be granted. We do observe a trend over time of licenses moving from rural to urban areas. But Porrick, do you want to jump in on this, please?
Yeah, I smiled when I heard Francis saying that if there was no reason for an extinguishment, it would lead to more pubs in rural areas. Well, in the real world that I inhabit, the big problem we have is that it's in rural Ireland that the pubs are closing because the business is not there. They're not closing other than they're not viable. And to put it in context, you know, the type of businesses that we're talking about here, 52% of all of the pubs in the country, as per revenue, not my figures, revenue figures, have a turnover of less than 190,000 per annum. So there's going to be no rush, I can assure you, Francis, to opening pubs in rural Ireland. The second thing, and it surprised me because she also referred to the issue of taxis and the deregulation of taxis. And the one thing that I think anybody who's a regular user of taxis would say, the quality of taxis, the quality of service from taxis went way down on deregulation. The quality of the taxis and the quality of service. I was in a taxi as recently as last week, and when I asked to go to a certain place, I had to issue directions. So I believe that from the point of view of extinguishment, it's not really a barrier to entry for those who want. That's number one. Number two, we're not short. Donald has given the figures, I've given the figures. We have a non-trade outlet for every 369 people in the country. So from the point of view of availability of alcohol, wherever, there is not a shortage of availability, I can assure you.
Anne-Marie, just when I talk about that observable trend of licenses moving from rural towards urban areas, is there a view from a local authority perspective around the social impact of that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, certainly in Fingal with North Dublin, quite a lot of it is in a rural area, and I have to agree. A lot of the pubs have closed. I do think that's associated with that integrated approach I mentioned. You know, the balance between the community and any change being associated with, you know, consideration of public transport and other things. There is a social impact, and the broadening of the nighttime economy and making sure that we can perhaps run smaller type events in towns and villages may assist. I think the changes to the planning laws in terms of transformation of those buildings and avoiding dereliction is important, so that, you know, they can be changed to habitable homes. But I'm not sure. I mean, from a Vintners perspective, I'm not sure what the solution is there. It does seem like that the business isn't available.
Francis, I don't want to dwell for too long on the extinguishment issue, but I don't know, do you want to come back in response to Porrick's comments?
Yeah, no, just a couple of things. I mean, people, if there isn't business in a local area, you can drop your licenses. Businesses close everywhere, but a butcher opening in Dublin doesn't have to get a butcher's license by the closing of a butcher somewhere else in the country and pay for that license. So that to me is just an anomaly, and that's what the OECD and that's what the Competition Authority would have pointed out 20-something years ago at this stage. I mean, I take the point on your point about taxis, and by the way, I probably use more taxis than anybody on this call because I've done it all my life. And one of the things that it did improve was the volume of taxis available. I used to have to walk home at night time for meetings, and I was able to get a taxi and be safer at a certain stage. I agree with you about the quality, and that's why I pointed to the fact that I think the licenses should be associated with quality control of what's being delivered, whether it's by the pubs or the hotels or whatever. I think that's where regulation comes in. And I think that was not done adequately with the taxis. And I would agree with your criticism that the quality of them is not as high as it was. Having said that, I think the world over now with new technology, I think the issue of knowing where people are going is becoming a different one. But I do take the point in relation to quality of the merchandise. I think I said that clearly, actually, in what I said. Thank you.
So moving on maybe briefly to the suggestion that licensing can play a role in the expansion of cultural offerings. This was a theme definitely in the work of the Nighttime Economy Task Force around the idea of new license types for different venues or cultural offerings and events. So Neil, do you want to give us a perspective on this?
I do, but I'd like to address some of the other points. I think if people really want to see what we have to say about this, they can look at our submission, which we'll make public like later or this week. I'd like to address a few things that were mentioned there. I'll just do it in order, I think. But it was mentioned that clubs may not want to go till any later than 5 a.m. It is true at the moment that not many clubs would want to go past 5 a.m. But there are others that would like to. And I think there's also a conversation here around decoupling the sale of alcohol with the provision of entertainment. So whatever it is that replaces the dance license in the future, maybe a new entertainment license can help to provide entertainment. There seems to be this conversation or this assumption always that when the bar starts, at least stop serving alcohol, that's the end of the night, and it's then you're then considered to be in drinking up time. We would like, you know, this argument around alcohol can go on and on and on. And in certain ways, we don't want to get too involved in that. We feel that the bar should be able to open until later, and we think operators will be responsible enough to act appropriately when they get extensions to the bar. But we want to make a very clear point in relation to differentiating between entertainment and the sale of alcohol. And we do think there is a desire out there to open nightclubs beyond 5 a.m. And there will definitely be, as we change the licensing laws, as we go later, people will want to go later again. One of the things, and I really need to pick up Ewan on this, and it was mentioned as well, I think, by Donald too, in relation to the 2003 Licensing Act. I mean, alcohol consumption has dropped in the UK since then. So the Licensing Act, I think, was enacted, although it's 2003, I think was enacted in 2005. So it hasn't resulted in an increase in alcohol consumption, as some may fear. And while street crime may have spread out over later into the night, there's no compelling argument or evidence, as Ewan put us, to say that there's been an increase in street crime. And he mentioned assaults as well. And I'd really like to see that data because, you know, I was in the UK before those laws came in, and I was in the UK after those laws came in. And I can tell you one thing for certain is that pressure cooker tension-filled atmosphere that was in urban centres and in city centres and in districts like in Manchester and in London disappeared overnight, you know. So I'm sorry that I'm swerving your initial question. I think we've made our points on all of that very clear. That I'm happy to skip that for the moment if you don't mind. And then one last thing in relation to the extinguishment thing. Not giving access to young operators and collectors who would like to open their own bars and venues has been a big problem in rural Ireland. There's a lot of desire out there to open bars, to open venues. You know, the current regulations right across the country suit big business. They suit they're there to act as barriers to entry. The current regulations, as we have there, suit a big business. Barriers to entry are favoured, and they essentially suit monopolies in a lot of areas as well. And that's something we need to look at, particularly if you want to get new operators into the market and into the industry.
So I have no issue with swerving to cover other topics, of course, but in fairness, while it may be included in your submission.
Yeah, sorry to be, but I think there were other things to address there and preference.
Yeah, but we also
absolutely,
through some of these issues that are in your submissions. So briefly, maybe if you could expand on your view around the cultural offering piece and the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has felt for all the time that I've been involved in nightlife that we've been joint at the hip with pubs. And I mean, we love pubs, we support pubs, we want pubs to thrive and to prosper, but we've always had this issue that we haven't had a license that suits us, and not only nightclubs, other types of cultural venues. So with the amendments to the theatre license back in 2008, there was far more activity and colour in our city centres, and in other it was, to be fair, it was more so a Dublin thing rather than other areas of the country. But what we did see over that time, where the upsurge in theatre licenses began and then ended, we were seeing a lot more on offer in the city centre at a time when it really needed us. Was it a loophole? It was a little bit of a loophole. It wasn't being entirely used in the original spirit of what that was meant to be, but it was a license that suited the likes of nightclubs, theatres and other alternative spaces to be able to increase their cultural offering at night and go later into the night. Actually, there were pubs availing of that theatre license as well. It wasn't just nightclubs, but it was a license that suited, you know, many people that wanted to put on events and run clubs and run all types of events at night. And that was stopped overnight, and our nightlife has suffered badly since.
Thanks very much. I want to bring in Donal on this. Donal, you were very clear about the 3 license types that you think should exist. Do you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, I just want to take up that point by Sunil and the theatre licenses and alternative venues, non-pub or non-alcohol related. So we want to be clear. We fully support the thrust of the Nighttime Economy Task Force to increase range and diversity of cultural offerings in our city centre. That is a really welcome development. It will be good for us and good for business. However, we want to be clear that if any business requires the sale of alcohol for on-premise consumption, that is done on a level playing field perspective, that the requirements we must satisfy to provide a safe, enjoyable experience for our staff and customers are the same for everybody, that there can be no backdoor entry to the licensed trade with a new formal license that allows the sale of alcohol without meeting the same public safety, insurance, security considerations that we have to face. So, you know, plenty of pubs and plenty of other venues used the theatre license between 2000 and 2008, but I think it just, you know, we clearly saw it as a blatant abuse of what was intended, because lots of the businesses that got them were not theatres, were never theatres, aren't theatres, and lots of the businesses came up with definitions of performance that were verging on the farcical and running to 4 and 5 a.m. with a guy playing a banjo in the corner and defining that as a musical performance. So we will welcome diversity in the nighttime economy. We just think it's really important that the pitch is level, that the conditions around the sale of alcohol are the same for everyone, and in the merits of simplifying licensing law, that any business involved in the sale of alcohol for on-premise consumption gets the same publican's license as everybody else.
Okay, I see a couple of other panelists have their hands raised. Porrick, I might bring you in first, and then Francis, please.
Yes, Neil, thanks for that. I mean, I'm just a couple of things there that in terms of the cultural licenses, Donald mentioned this. It's all about a level playing pitch, right? And that's all we're looking for. And essentially, we have seen it for the last 20 years with registered clubs, many of whom have been subsidised through lotto money, through grants, etc., and they're competing as if they were pubs. So while they have a specific remit under law, it's been actually, they drive a coach and four through it. So what we're talking about is a level playing pitch. And also someone used, on the one hand, there are people looking for the decoupling of the late night economy from alcohol sales, but they want to be central to the alcohol sales. I just don't quite understand that. And to say that the extinguishment thing suits big business. 78% of all pubs in this country are in license band 1 and 2, with a turnover of less than 390,000. Now, if that's big business, I'm in the wrong business. So it doesn't actually suit big business. This is not about big business. It's quite the opposite, the extinguishment issue. And can I say for the cultural outlets, beware what you look for, because when the day comes that you go looking to renew your insurance and you tell the insurer that you're selling alcohol, and the minister will be very well aware of this, you will end up in a situation where your insurance will go through the roof, or more importantly, you won't get any insurance at all. So essentially, what we're talking about is a level playing pitch, and if people are subsidized by the state, that subsidy shouldn't be used to compete with businesses that are not subsidized.
Francis, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just two points really. I mean, this phrase level playing field is mentioned again and again, and the point has been made that it's not a benefit to bigger players rather than smaller ones. The reality is, if you're going to be a huge pub, 40k as an initial setup cost is very small. If you're going to be a small business, it's very big. So that's just a fallacious argument to start with. And actually a level playing field would mean no extinguishment charge, to be perfectly honest with you, if you go back to the logic of it. The other thing I'd like to say is that, and I think the Minister will be very aware of this, the population in Ireland is changing again. It's redistributing itself geographically. Government, for the first time in my life, has had a real spatial policy, a real credible spatial policy, and a commitment to it. So to me, the services for the communities, which cover what some of the issues we're talking about here and many more as well, but also that they should be planned by the local authorities. I think we've had a very laissez-faire approach to many things. I think that the strong role of the local authorities, not in a kind of command and control sense, which has been strongly criticised in the past, but in the context of actually making sure the facilities are responding to growing populations of different kinds and different types, and reducing any barriers that would stop the market system delivering on that in line with what the local authorities believe we should have. Thank you.
Well, I certainly can't move on without asking Anne-Marie to jump in on that point.
There's no doubt local authorities know their towns and villages better than anyone else, and there's different needs in every area. To the point about the art centres and trying to have that cultural offering available into the night, they need a level playing field too. So I think the licensing laws may very well be a necessary complementary part of achieving that, late into the evening. I suppose that's in terms of achieving that balance and what should happen in a local area, that's what our county development plans are about. I know the Dublin City Development Plan was mentioned earlier in terms of certain locations, but the development plan sets out to achieve balance and set the planning laws in a local area to suit the demographics. So just to some extent, that process is already underway in terms of trying to encourage the right thing in the right locations.
Thank you very much. Ewan, I see you have your hand up, but actually I want to move the conversation on a little bit.
Okay.
And I was going to come to you first on the next piece anyway. So
okay.
If I could, if I could move on to the discussion around how we balance the provision of alcohol with public health interests. We have a question that came in from Aisling Sheehan, who asks, how can the forthcoming reform of alcohol licensing ensure that the availability of alcohol is not increased, given that alcohol availability is one of the biggest drivers of alcohol-related harms, and what evidence should be used to inform this? Ewan, I thought you might want to come in first on this, please.
Okay. Well, I think the most immediate thing that could be done to address the point that Aisling has raised there, I think it would be that health impact assessment would be undertaken in relation to the legislation that's been proposed. I think it would unearth a lot of the issues that we have raised in our submissions, both to this process and to the nighttime economy task force. So I think that would be certainly the most immediate way to address that. I just briefly, if I can, I'll just go back to the other point. I don't accept, and I fully appreciate Anne-Marie has, obviously deeper knowledge of local communities and villages, etc. But I don't accept the view that you have to have an alcohol license so that a cultural offering can be extended into the night. I just ask the question, why? Why would that be the case? I would like to know an answer to that particular reason. And as Pádraig outlined, many of these venues in the hands of an alcohol licensing are going to face enormous increase in costs in relation to insurance. And again, I would ask the question in relation to that was why? Why would the insurers be charging such an exorbitant fee for public insurance in these venues? It's because of the alcohol related harm. It's because the consumers are engaging in a subtoactive substance. So, we have to nail in some respects what's involved here. And the idea that we can somehow only improve the cultural offering because we're selling alcohol seems to me completely wrong-headed.
So I want to bring both Pádraig and Donal in on this. And maybe you might just outline, I suppose, how your members meet those public health concerns that are associated with the provision of alcohol.
Well, there's very clear legislation in relation to how a business has got to be conducted, and it's laid out very specifically in the 2003 Act in terms of who you can serve, when you can serve them, and what you've got to do if you've issues on your premises. So it's laid out very clearly, and there are significant consequences up to and including the loss of license. So the legislation that's there, and I said at the very beginning in my initial introduction that we need to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are certain things that are effective, and that's where the licensing system and the renewal of the licensing system and the capacity to object to the renewal of a license on the basis of, and if you look at it today, Neil, there are basically two reasons why you can object to the renewal of the license. One is the suitability of the premises, and the other is the suitability of the individual to run the premises. So within what's there at the minute, and that's for people with a full license. So essentially, there are safeguards, there are checks and balances there, and they have been used. So what's there just needs to be implemented, and it is being implemented, but it has to be implemented evenly and fairly and across the board.
I know Anne-Marie has her hand raised, but Donal, do you concur with Pádraig?
Yeah. I think we should take one step back and go to first principles here. Why does the licensing regime exist at all? And the first thing to say is it does not exist to shield publicans from competition and to give incumbents an economic advantage. It exists to bring regulatory control. It exists because the government for generations have felt the need to have strong regulatory control on on-premise consumption of alcohol. And to that regard, the responsibilities of holding and renewing your license are what ensures that the vast majority of pubs are extremely well run. And I think if you talk to the Gardaí, I was very encouraged by what Anne-Marie said there about when the authorities engage with the license holders, they get a very strong response by and large. And those individuals who don't or won't respond can be dealt with. We have a fantastic pub culture in this country. We have world-class pubs. We receive study trips every 6-8 weeks pre-COVID from operators looking to examine the standards in Dublin. Part of the reason we have that is we have a strong regulatory regime, and the owners and operators of pubs understand their responsibilities here. So the regulatory advantages of the licensing system are considerable, and obviously will be considered in terms of the review going forward.
I'm going to come to both Anne-Marie and then Sunil briefly on this, and then I want to move on to the next one if that's possible. Anne-Marie?
Just a short point, Neil, in terms of Eunice Commons. I mean, the point I was making really is that a theatre licence has proved valuable to theatres. I'm not commenting in relation to their misuse, but in terms of the offer for the customer, it does seem to be desirable by the customer. Thanks.
Sunil?
Yeah, sorry, Neil, what do I need to respond to particularly in this?
Well, I suppose we're talking about how we balance the public health interests with proposed liberalisation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of missing a point here in that alcohol consumption has been rising in the off-trade and not in the on-trade, you know, and I think Union could probably confirm some of those statistics. So we seem to be pointing an awful lot at the on-trade and everything it's guilty of and what it may be guilty of in the future and where this will all lead to. But, you know, anyone in on this conversation, particularly Donal and Porrick, will tell you, you know, the trade isn't what it used to be, you know, and trends will tell us that it's not, there's not going to be that upsurge in demand. And, you know, people only have so much money. I think there's been this assumption as well that if people can go out till later, that they're going to continue drinking later, and you know, people only have so much money, you know. And I think what we've realized from the beginning, and what we hear from people as well, is that they'd like to choose the time that they go out at. That doesn't mean that they're going to drink in excess, but really, I think if Union wants to target, and he obviously has, the areas of the alcohol trades that are most problematic, it is the off trade and not the on trade. And overall, alcohol consumption has been steadily dropping throughout this the new millennium. And you know, I think we can forecast what's going to happen, what could happen. I think we need to just do it. Also, just to address what Porrick was saying about decoupling. I guess what we're proposing is that, you know, when the alcohol license ends, that entertainment can be provided after that time. So, for instance, if the alcohol license was to stop or elapse at 5 a.m., that entertainment could be provided after that. You know, obviously, safety permitting and noise regulations being in place, etc. You know, so, I mean, there's a few more things I could probably talk about there, but I think in terms of alcohol consumption, we shouldn't assume too much, you know, because from what we're seeing around us in other countries, and another thing as well, you mentioned Amsterdam, and mentioned something back in 2009. Why since then have Amsterdam introduced 24-hour licenses? And why also, if there was such a problem with 24-hour licensing over in the UK, have they not reversed it since? So just a few things.
So actually, there's a point you made that I'd like to pick up on, which is around the off license piece. At the moment, there's no dedicated license for online or delivery sales, and there's definitely been a strong campaign around a need to tighten that up. And I'd like to get some perspectives on whether that's a good idea or not. And Francis, I don't know if you want to come in on this point, maybe. I know you have your hand up also.
No, I didn't actually want to come in on this point, so let me hold and I'll come back in later, since I don't want to comment on that.
Anyone want to jump in on this one?
Well, Neil, it's probably not true to say that you know, the delivery service and online, when over the last 10 years, what we have is almost every significant supermarket who now do deliveries. There's not a delivery license, but there are deliveries, and there are also quite a lot of illegal deliveries, as in, you know, dial this number and we'll be there within 20 minutes, irrespective of the time of the day. And the bottom line is there is no control with that. There is no regulation. They're unscrupulous operators. So whether the person ordering the alcohol is 14 or 40, they will get the alcohol. So I see no merit. I see, even this will not be displacing business in a pub. So take my VFI hat off. I see no merit, no justification, morally or any other way, in creating an online opportunity. So what we will actually have is Amazon with a big warehouse somewhere in the Midlands or somewhere in Dublin, and they'll be the new biggest sellers of alcohol in the country. I can see no merit in it whatsoever.
Ewan? You're on mute.
Beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. Two things, just briefly on the off licenses, and again in terms of changing any circumstances around the off license. And Sunil is right. Obviously, nearly 70% of all alcohol use now is purchased in the off trade, and any countenance to change the hours around the off licenses we think would be deeply, deeply regrettable. We obviously outlined that in our submission as well. But to the point on the online sales, and there's no doubt about it that there is communities throughout Ireland which are impacted by, the unregulated delivery of alcohol at all hours of the morning, all hours of the day, and into hands of frankly a lot of young people. So there's been a campaign engaged in by ICANN, pushing this particular matter late last year, and I think there's sufficient evidence to show that there is undoubtedly a need to have regulation around the online sales of alcohol.
Okay, Francis, you wanted to come in generally?
Yeah, just a point. There's a couple of points that have come up. I want to say that I agree completely with Donal and Porrick that the licensing system was not set up to create economic rents. Definitely not designed to do that at all. But that's the effect it had, and I think that's what we just have to recognise as a fact. The other issue, I think, is that, and I'm very struck by the fact that both of them talked about that the majority of their members, the majority of people running facilities behave really well and really responsibly. And I think that's really where I want to come together with this issue about having a holistic system, that not one part is blaming the other, that somebody says it's this and somebody says, well, the guards aren't there, or somebody says there isn't the reporting system or there isn't the reference system. I think we want to design a system now where all the bits are linked up. We all know the fact that a chain is as strong as the weakest link. And really what I'm saying is that in order that both Porrick and Donal can say, well, actually, it's not just the vast majority, all our members are behaving it. And in fact, we've got a good system in place to make sure that that's happening. That's what we really want to try to get to. So I would just, again, argue in favour of making sure that this reform process looks at every dimension to try to get the best possible solution. Thank you.
Speaking of other dimensions, obviously I'd be a negligent justice official if I didn't talk about public order for at least a couple of minutes. And we have a question in from William Reedy on this, who's asking how it's intended to address the antisocial behaviour that residents currently experience as a direct result of people socialising in licensed premises, particularly in rural tourist towns. I want to come to Porrick and Donal on this, but firstly, Anne-Marie, I wonder, might you reflect on your experience of JPCs and how the concerns of communities around antisocial behaviour are addressed?
Well, a couple of things I would say that, and it relates back to the last point, that takeaway offering, that delivery offering caused significant problems during COVID on the public realm, and probably caused quite a lot of public order issues. And to the point here, I suppose one of the issues with the nighttime economy pilots is that there should be a nighttime economy advisor, so a local authority based official that will provide that liaison between local communities and licensed premises and other premises indeed, to make sure those public order issues can be known, first of all, and secondly dealt with the relevant authorities. So whereas local authorities don't have a public order remit, we generally know about it. We also need to liaise with the Gardaíes to get it dealt with and deal directly with the source if it's coming from a licensed premises. So it's not an easy one to resolve, but it does, that balanced approach about the needs of everybody needs to be priority in terms of any changes to the laws.
Porrick?
Yeah, I think it's a complex issue, Neil. I think the first thing to say is that to go back to the issue of where alcohol is sold and consumed, and it is considerably less nowadays in pubs than it was heretofore. I think the second issue that a lot of the public order offences from my discussions with the Gardaí stem not from alcohol but from other substances, and it's convenient in some cases to be able to point the finger at licensed premises. Having said that, there are some genuine issues around some licensed premises, and they're generally addressed very clearly by the license holder, for the very simple reason it is a valid reason for the objection to the renewal of a license. So it's not a complaint that a publican can take lightly. And I've seen it as recently as in the last 2 to 3 months, where there has been an objection to the renewal of a license on the basis of noise coming from a premises. And, you know, in that scenario, the publican has to, if he or she is consistently interested in the future well-being of their business, they have to take any such complaints very seriously, because it is a valid reason for the objection to the renewal of a license. So it does happen, but it's certainly not common.
Donal?
2 points. On the last page of our submission, we make the point that COVID uncovered a significant omission in licensing law, and we believe that the reform of licensing law should expressly prohibit the consumption of alcohol in public spaces. Alcohol should be only consumed in homes, in private property, and licensed premises and licensed outdoor areas by local authorities. You should not be allowed to wander the streets of Dublin, the parks of Dublin, the beaches of our country with alcohol, consuming it willy-nilly. So I think it's really important that that gets dealt, and that's irrespective of the source of the alcohol, whether it's takeaway pints from pubs or cans from off licenses. You should not be allowed to consume alcohol in public spaces. Full stop. That's a black and white change we think really needs to happen. The second point around antisocial behaviour, public order, noise issues at closing time and post-closing time in pubs, that's an issue that's been in the trade forever. It comes and it goes. I think it's proof positive that the power of the license works, because if the Gardaí arrive to the license holder and he refuses to take steps to mitigate the problem, to take the steps that are within his control, he's going to have a problem. And generally speaking, these issues get resolved. And the fact that he has to renew his license every year is a significant point of control that can be exercised on the licensee, and I think is a real benefit of the system.
We're coming towards an end now, folks, but I'm reliably informed that I've been a bit mean on Sunil and I've given him less time than others. So I'm going to invite you in, Sunil, maybe to have the final word on the panel discussion.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's lots of good input from the other. I know we don't agree on everything, but I think there is some common ground here that I hope we can work at in the coming times before this bill is published. But just in relation to public order, I mean, I think something where venues can step up is to improve their dispersal policies. You know, I think we all have responsibility, and that's how we engage with patrons, those who attend the nights, the promoters, everyone involved, to send the right message to those who are attending events to leave quietly and to get out of the area as soon as possible. But we also need better transport options as well. Something around sound. We've told a lot about this, because this is a problem, especially as we go later into the night, and it's something that we had in our submission, that maybe venues could be graded based on their ability to control noise. You know, that will take an investment, and that's something that not all venues will necessarily readily want to sign up to. But then again, if you're charging these venues exorbitant licensing fees and cost that could be diverted into something like soundproofing, then there's a better chance that we can have a more harmonious relationship between these venues and local residents. Also, and then just finally on this, with staggered closing in place, I mean, there's less potential for volatile situations to develop on the streets. And I think we talked about staggered closing for a long time now. I think it's something that we all agree with in theory. I think it's something that these new licensing laws will sort out very quickly. So I think we should look forward to where we're going with it. And we do all have to kind of take a little bit of a leap of faith. We're not all going to know instantly at this point what way it's going to be, but I think we do agree in theory about certain aspects of the changes, including staggered closing, which I believe will help the situation that we're talking about in relation to public order. Thanks.
And with impeccable timing, we've just hit 3:30 p.m. So I just want to wrap us up now. I hope everyone watching and indeed those on the panel enjoyed this as much as I did, and thank you all for your cooperation. It's a bit trickier trying to manage these things in a digital space than if we were in one room together. but thank you very much for your contributions and indeed for your cooperation. I think it's pretty clear we have a wide range of views on the licensing laws and the complex issues that the Minister has to consider as we move forward with the Sale of Alcohol Bill. But on behalf of myself, on behalf of the Minister, on behalf of the Department of Justice, thank you, and thank you to all who tuned in to observe us today. Thanks a lot. Oh, the Minister wants to come back in, sorry. We can't hear you.
She's muted.
Sorry, I have a double mute. It's just really briefly, just want to thank everyone for joining us, in particular the panel of speakers. I mean, we've read through the submissions, but I think when you talk it out and you tease it through, and I suppose you're hearing different views and responding to it, it just brings it more to life, and I think gives everyone a sense of the challenges in terms of landing on certain policy areas, but at the same time, I think there's common ground as well that's even come through from the discussions here today. So look, just really want to thank everyone for their contributions, and look forward to working with all of you as we bring the bill forward. Super.
Minister.